So before we talk, I thought this being a conference on Jewish music, why not listen to some music first? And I won't say anything about the music, withholding my comments, taking the advice of a French Russian musicologist and philosopher, Vladimir Yankelevich, who taught us that description of music actually deprives us of the pure listening experience. So we're just going to listen together. So, that was Jewish music. Believe it or not.
I believe it.
It actually comes to us from Spain, of all places. This song is from 14th century Spain. You see here, this is a Barcelona agata, very famous historical agata, and I have the this close-up of this performer here who's playing the bagpipe. So, as I mentioned, this comes to us from 14th century Spain, specifically the northwest region known as Celtic Galicia. And Galicia, Spain is considered one of the original Celtic nations, the others being Ireland, Wales, Scotland, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, and Brittany, France. The Celts established a presence in northwest Spain as early as the 6th century BCE. And some believe that the Celtic and Iberian tribes intermingled and created a unified tribal identity while others contend that their respective identities were so strong that that would have prevented such intermingling. But whatever the case, the Romans actually identified them all together, they lumped them all together, as Celt-Iberians. So the bagpipe of northern Spain is called a gaita. And when used in Sephardic music, it's often called, cleverly, the Sephardic bagpipe. And that's what we heard on this recording of Kalbi Kalbi, a song that actually spread among both Jews and Muslims in Spain in the 14th century. Both of those groups feeling intense pressure to convert to Catholicism at that time. So the meaning of this work, of this piece, in Arabo Spanish, which is what we just heard, is Kalbi, Bi, Kalbi, Kalbi, Kalbi Arabi. My heart is in my heart is Arabic. And the Hebrew text actually imitates the Arabic phonetically. Koli bi le avi. All of my heart is my father's. So it's sort of a protest against the pressures again to convert. So Kalbi Kalbi is a great place, I think, to begin a conference on Jewish music. First, it should cause us to question our assumptions and ponder why certain sounds seem Jewish to us and why certain other sounds maybe don't. Here's a hint. Jewish music is music we experience as Jewish. A circular statement that's roughly equivalent to, I know what I like and I like what I know. So what we hear or do not hear as quote-unquote Jewish is primarily shaped by the exposure that we might have to our musical communities, our families, and the conventions within those communities. So for instance, an Ashkenazi Jew's expectation for what Kol Nidre might sound like would vary significantly from what an Iraqi Jew might expect. Which leads us to a second very important point. And this may sound controversial, but we'll explain what this means as we move along. No piece of music is inherently Jewish or non-Jewish. Factors such as text, context, theme, function, and convention determine the music's identity. So, Yiddish singer and folklorist Ruth Rubin said something very powerful. She said, from the grave apparently, Jewish music is as diverse and variable as the Jews themselves.
You do if you're recording. If they're recording this, the mic is probably better.
So again, to quote, Jewish music is as diverse and variable as the Jews themselves. And a third lesson from Kalbi Kalbi, what we just heard, is that the music of the Jews inevitably draws upon the sounds and resources of its surroundings. The Sephardic bagpipe is really no more unusual than a church organ being used in the 19th century in Central Europe and congregations there, or guitars coming into American Jewish congregations. Fourth, when there is free or relatively free cultural exchange, as there was among Jews, Christians, and Muslims prior to the Reconquista in Spain, barriers separating groups tend to be very porous. This is as true for the arts as it was for commerce, industry, trade, science, language, philosophy, you name it. So that, I think, leads us to this very thorny question of what is Jewish music? First of all, Jewish music is something of a misnomer, because Jewish is an adjective, and that's something of a problem, because when combined with the noun music, it forms a compound Jewish music, right? This can lead us to believe that there is something specifically Jewish about the music itself, some quality that is uniquely, distinctly, and utterly distinct. The Romantic notion of an song, that is a pure and original melodic kernel from which all Jewish folk music's derived, motivated the earliest scholars of Jewish music. Most famous being Abraham Ilson, known as the father of Jewish musicology. Abraham Zvi Ilson was a Latvian-born musicologist, comparative musicologist, who modeled his search for the original Jewish melody on the search that Leopold Zunz, a liturgist, had done in the 19th century, looking for the Ur text, the kind of central text upon which all other texts were developed for Jewish liturgy. Ilson's hope was that through the examination of disparate Jewish folk songs, and especially songs of the historically isolated Yemenite Jews, he would happen upon an oral tradition that reaches back all the way to the Second Temple period in Jerusalem, which, of course, the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 years, so that's, or in the year 70 rather, so that's quite an assumption. So the next generation of Jewish musicologists were fond of pointing out not only that Ilson's faith in the tenacity of the oral tradition was overstated, to say the least. I think this is true for anyone who's played the game of telephone, right? But also that melodic material is susceptible to local influences, meaning that over time, exposure to surrounding music cultures invariably impacts the music of the Jews wherever they might live. So as it turns out, the prayer chants of Yemenite Jews were influenced, among other things, by the sounds of the muezzin, who was calling people to prayer and chanting the Quran from the neighboring mosques. So in 1976, Austrian-born musicologist Eric Werner threw a wet blanket on the whole search for this Ur song, writing, quote, "There is no concrete answer to the eternally silly question of what is Jewish in music." Eternally silly question. And only concrete arguments should be taken seriously. So the silliness of this question actually should have been obvious to Ilson himself. At the beginning of last century, Ilson settled in Jerusalem, where he was immediately struck by the diversity of the 300 synagogues that he encountered there. He wrote this, which again should have given him some clues. The various synagogues were conducted according to the customs of the respective countries of origin, and their traditional song varied greatly one from the other. Thus began Ilson's monumental 10-volume thesaurus of Hebrew Oriental melodies, which he published between 1914 and 1933, and included musical examples from Yemenite, Babylonian, Persian, Bukharian, Moroccan, German, Eastern European, and other communities. Yet instead of seeing these widely varied customs as evidence of the Jewish instinct to adapt and modify, we could even say the Jewish proclivity to do these things, he concluded, strangely I think, the Jewish song is an amalgamation of non-Jewish and Jewish elements. And despite the former, the Jewish elements are found in all traditions, and only these are of interest to the scholars. In other words, ignore what you actually hear and focus on these supposed Jewish elements, whatever those might be. Again, a very romantic notion. Here's an image of a young girl playing kol nidre on the piano. Disentangling the Jewish from the non-Jewish in even our longest-standing Jewish melodies is no easy task. For example, you may be familiar with the so-called Mi Sinai tunes, or the From Sinai tunes, a designation implying that, like the Torah that was supposedly revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai, Moshe Kibel Torah Mi Sinai from Pirkei Avot, these tunes too should not be changed, and most of these tunes are found in the high holiday services. Well, not quite as old as Moses, or the time of Moses, if you wish. These tunes are among the oldest that we have in our synagogue, dating back to the 11th to 15th century. And depending on how you count these tunes, there's upwards of maybe 39 individual melodies, or really motifs, as it were, which are kind of short musical phrases that exist in recognizable variations and can be combined in different ways, rather than a song with a beginning, middle, and end. So even if what I'm saying doesn't resonate with you, I think you know some of these melodies. These would include what we understand to be the Ashkenazi Kol Nidre. Da 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 da, and the various other motifs in that patchwork. The Great Aleinu. Da 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 da. The Ma'ariv, the evening tune. Da 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 da, and many others. Their place of origin is the historical birthplace of Ashkenaz itself, the Rhineland region of Germany. And when we strip away the emotional associations or memories that we may be ascribed to these tunes, we begin to notice characteristically Germanic elements. The same elements that we hear in medieval German street songs, the Gassenhauer, the ballads, Minnesang, and even church songs. So a few years ago, I compiled this comparative chart that alternates seamlessly between 4-bar phrases of Mycenae tunes and German Christmas carols. O du Fröhlich, Stille Nacht, O Tannenbaum, etc. So I'm going to sing through this. You can join me if you want. And again, it goes Mycenae, Christmas carol, and back and forth. Da 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 So that's an example of the Jewish creativity to make something distinct within the cultural fabric that you're making the thing. So if we were to take Idelson's recommendation and strip away the foreign material from the Jewish, and even something like this, we would actually discover that there are cantillation motifs, melodic fragments used for the chanting of the Torah and other selected biblical texts, existing side by side with the strictly German folk material. But, and this is a big one, the cantillation systems themselves absorb sounds of the dominant culture. And that's why the biblical chants of the German Jews would sound very German, as opposed to the chants of the Syrian Jews, which would sound very Syrian, etc., etc. So musical mixing of this sort is usually identified as a diaspora phenomenon. Centuries of migration and exposure have left their mark. But if it were indeed possible to follow the trail of Jewish folk song all the way back to the Second Temple in Jerusalem, what we would find would just as likely be hybrid in the way that we experience Jewish music today. Ancient Israel was a small and vulnerable region, surrounded and sometimes conquered by larger empires of the area, Israel was susceptible to external influences, political, economical, theological, gastronomical, you name it. Whether the foreigners were occupiers, rival powers, allied populations, or merely passing through, they inevitably left their mark. Thus, we might conclude, alongside that eternally silly question of what is Jewish and Jewish music, resides an equally silly pursuit of musical purity, which just doesn't exist. Indeed, no culture, Jewish or otherwise, is an island. The mirage of a pure and uncorrupted language or ritual, recipe, belief, bloodline even, evaporates upon closer inspection. And human beings are genetically inclined towards interaction, cooperation, and mimicry. So what we experience really is a phenomenon known as hybridization. And of course, during different periods, there may be a stronger force of preservation against hybrid forms, and other times we might have more hybridity, such as during migration or the internet age. But whatever the case may be, the end result is a hybrid. And sometimes these hybrids can become traditions or mainstreams, but they are hybrids nonetheless. So with that in mind, I invite you to listen to a piece that to many of us might satisfy our subjective understanding of what sounds Jewish. Here's a nice picture here of the Friedmann band from Poland, one of the famous klezmer ensembles. So the music that we just heard has all the hallmarks of a classic klezmer performance, if you'd agree. The instrumentation, we have, in the older bands, we had fiddles and violas and celli, and the cymbal, the hammered dulcimer as well. The playing techniques that we've come to expect, we hear some of the slides and the moans and the catches and the laughs and these sorts of things. The rhythms that we know well, the slow klezmer hora in 3/8, which is not to be confused with the fast-paced Israeli hora, which is a totally different thing, something of a corruption actually. That's for another time. The doina, which is this free metered improvised section played by the violin, and the mode as well, the melodic mode, known as the Fregish, or sometimes Ahava Rabbah mode, da 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 da, which I think gets our Jewish spirits moving.
Starts out as major though. I was surprised.
So the mode itself is a major-minor mode, so you can actually play around with both. It's a combined mode. That's what makes it distinct from Western music per se, as we've come to know it. But this actually wasn't this band. It wasn't this Friedmann Kapelle, and it actually wasn't even a klezmer song. What you just heard, yeah, I tricked you, I'm sorry. With the visual aid and everything. You know, al chet shechetanu lefanecha. But it was in fact, a Roma song, or a gypsy song. So, it's Moldavian song and dance by Zoltan and his gypsy orchestra. So there's something here too. The Jews and the Roma, the people formerly known as gypsies, they occupied a common otherness in Eastern European lands, as you may know. They were stateless wanderers, closed off from numerous professions and geographical areas, subjected to prejudices and persecutions, and for the most part, again, occupied the margins of society. So for centuries, Jewish and Roma musicians interacted, both as bandmates and as rivals in the very competitive world of weddings and popular music. And in fact, there was really very little to differentiate the music that they played, because their employers and their audiences wanted a certain sound, and that sound was the product of their organic collaborations. So, with a few minor tweaks here and there, a Roma song might sound like a klezmer song, and vice versa. And the same was true for stories as well. This is, I don't know if you can read that, but this is from a graphic novel by Joanne Spar, Klezmer, Book 1, Tales of the Wild East, which gets to the point about storytelling. I'll read it for you. So it begins with a klezmer musician. There are Jewish stories too. If you want to catch the way of it, every now and again, you stop singing and you tell a story. I don't know any Jewish stories, says the gypsy musician. I know gypsy stuff, but it's always with caravans. Well, that can work, except instead of gypsy caravans, you say that it's Moses and the caravan of the Israelites in the desert. Can the caravan of Israelites go on a pilgrimage to pray to the Black Virgin? No. I do know Russian stories, though, with princes, princesses, and Baba Yaga. That can work, but you have to make it kosher, to make them kosher. Really? Yeah, instead of princes, you say the rabbi's son. Instead of princesses, you stick in a rabbi's daughter who lived holed up indoors because her father was very strict. That's nonsense. Wait. Page 2. Instead of they married, you say his daughter married a wealthy boy. Ha 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 ha. They had many children. That you can leave as is. But each time you have a grateful king gave him his daughter's hand in marriage, you say, to thank him, the Tsar decided not to kill Jews for a few weeks. And if the story has a really happy ending, the rabbi's son becomes the second most important figure of the realm. He buys back his shtetl and does away with taxes and forbids pogroms. And can't he become the king or something? No. You have to stay believable. Yaakov, my friend, I think we'll be better off if you tell the Jewish stories. So the fact that we hear certain music or certain stories as Jewish actually tells us more about ourselves than it does about the music that we're listening to. Eric Werner, who I mentioned before, a musicologist, recounted a case in point. He said, quote, I once provided an Armenian church song in the Ahava Rabbah Fregish mode that we just heard, with Yiddish words, and had it sung at a cantor's convention. The assembly was completely enchanted by this, quote, typical Jewish melody, and was prepared to introduce it into the synagogue. A week later, the episode was forgotten, and the cantors went back to their old conviction of the essential Jewishness of that musical mode. That conviction is on par with the belief that the German language is a dialect of Yiddish. To complicate matters, that mode, the Ahava Rabbah, or Fregish mode, that we hear is so distinctively Jewish, likely came to Eastern Europe by way of the Tatars, or a Turkish ethnic group, during the Mongolian invasion of the area in the 13th century. So that brings us to another example. Here are the Hasidic Jews of Bukovina. The most well-known song in the Fregish or Ahava Rabbah mode is Hava Nagila, which also happens to be a contribution of Abraham Idelson. During the course of Idelson's research, he encountered the Sadegor Hasidim of Bukovina, currently part of Ukraine, and recorded several of their wordless nigunim, devotional melodies that were sung repeatedly to accompany or accomplish an ecstatic state. He was especially taken by a particular melody that he thought would fit very well with Psalm 118:24. This is the day the Lord has made, let us rejoice and be glad. So he took this melody and he took the text and he removed some of the obvious implications of the text. There's no mention of God. He adds an element of solidarity, and he came up with this. Let us rejoice and be glad. Hava Nagila v'nismecha. Let us sing and be glad. Hava Naranana v'nismecha. Awake, brothers, with a joyful heart. Uruachim b'lev sameach. Some claim that it was somebody else, a young cantor, Moshe Nathanson, who was Idelson's student at the time, who was the one who actually came up with the lyrics, and Idelson took credit for it. But whatever the case, Idelson explained the genesis of this musical concoction, writing, the tune originated at the court in Sadegura, Bukovina, and was brought to Jerusalem. In 1915, I wrote it down. In 1918, I needed a popular tune for a performance of my mixed choir in Jerusalem. My choice fell upon this tune, which I arranged in 4 parts and for which I wrote a Hebrew text. The choir sang it, and it apparently caught the imagination of the people. And here's a little hyperbole, I think. He says, for the next day, men and women were singing the song throughout Jerusalem. In no time, it spread throughout the country and thence throughout the world. Wow. I don't know how quickly it happened. But in 1918, that performance was part of an effort to unite the early Yishuv, the Jewish settlement that arose in Palestine after the British victory in World War I and the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which announced support for a Jewish national homeland in places that were taken over from the Turks. So in a pinch, Idelson used a tried and true method of musical composition. This is an important word, contrafaction. Contrafaction means the setting of new words to an old text. And here's actually how the original choral version of Hava Nagila sounded. This is a recording from 1922. But that doesn't really sound that joyous to me. I noticed some of you falling asleep during that. Indeed, if Hava Nagila remained in that original state, there's a great likelihood that we wouldn't even know it existed, actually. But the sound has been revived. The song has been revived in many different ways over the years. And this is another key to understanding the longevity of certain melodies, Jewish and otherwise. There have been performances by not only, congregations, ordinary people as it were, but also such musicians as the Berry Sisters, Chubby Checker, Bob Dylan, Celia Cruz, Anthrax.
Stuck on Chubby Checker.
The Chubby Checker version is great. You can look it up on YouTube. It's got like a surf rock sound. Pretty neat. And also Ben Folds 5 more recently. Just to name a handful. The uplifting nature of the tune, as I think we all know it today, is, I think, related to two different factors. One is, of course, the transforming impact of a quick tempo, which we don't really hear on the original recording. But also there's this desire of each generation to revive the tune with vitalizing performances, which is, again, a key to the longevity. Now we turn to something different, the Jews of Aleppo, Syria. So I'm going to play for you another example of contrafaction, again using an existing melody and putting new words to it. This one comes to us from the Syrian Jewish community, and I wonder if you can recognize the tune.
كيلو باسم حاد حاتنين كيلو دوري بابا تهلو يوتولو يوتو هارم يا سرورمي بطهار هارمي دو بشيور بدومي القدس يشاركو.
Okay, that's a little bit strange, right? So what's going on there? Well, there's a story behind every song. When the Jews left Aleppo, Syria in the early 19th century and established new communities abroad, they brought with them a type of poetry called the Pizmon, basically devotional poetry with Hebrew words. So most of these hymns consist of a Hebrew text set to popular Arab music. But these songs were used in a very religious way. So it's taking the secular into the sacred for family festivals like weddings, bar mitzvahs, brises, circumcisions, that sort of thing. So sometimes the melodies of these pizmonim incorporated sources that were outside of the sphere of knowledge of the pizmon writer. And this would be one example. The pizmon that we just heard, Mifalot Elohim, the works of God, was commissioned in New York City during the 1920s on the occasion of the wedding of a Syrian Jewish community. At the request of the groom, Cantor Moses Ashir, who is a well-known author of this pizmon literature, borrowed a melody from the groom's high school without knowing either of them that it was actually originally this Christmas song. And that's how that came to be. As odd as this example might seem, it was not the first and certainly not the last time that contrafaction brought a whole new set of associations and meanings to a text. In fact, Eastern European Hasidim, such as the Hasidim of Bukovina we talked about a moment ago, believe that God is the author of all melodies, and that it's a mitzvah, a commandment, to locate the holy spark in a secular melody and return that melody to its source by turning the song into a devotional song. Thus we find that many of the classical Hasidic nigunim originated as drinking songs, Cossack dances, military marches, and so on. And that brings us to this example. This is the Anacreontic Society of London. So you may know this story, but a variation of the process gave us the Star Spangled Banner.
Yes.
Soldiers at Baltimore's Fort McHenry raised the American flag to celebrate a crucial victory over British forces during the War of 1812. The sight of those broad stripes and bright stars inspired Francis Scott Key to write the poem that would eventually become the American national anthem. Key, very importantly, gave that poem to his brother-in-law, Judge Joseph Nicholson, who noticed that the words fit very well with a popular melody, the Anacreontic song, which was attributed to an English composer, John Stafford Smith. And that song was the official song of the Anacreontic Society, a drinking club, basically, for amateur musicians in 18th century London. The song was a tribute to the club's namesake, the ancient Greek poet Anacreon, who was renowned for his drinking songs and odes to love. And this is how the song originally sounded before we corrupted it into our national anthem. To Anacreon in heaven, where he sat in full glee, a few sons of harmony sent a petition that he their inspirer and patron would be. When the answer arrived from the jolly old Grecian, voice, fiddle, and flute no longer be mute. I'll lend you my name and inspire you to boot. And besides I'll instruct you, like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine.
I'm going to club.
Must have been a great club. So the Star Spangled Banner is just one of really many national anthems and other patriotic songs to use a pre-existing melody. For instance, you've probably noticed a very strong similarity between the British anthem God Save the Queen and My Country 'Tis of Thee. Canada bears a striking similarity to Mozart's March of the Priests from the Magic Flute. Hatikva, Israel's national anthem, has been traced to a number of folk sources, including Romanian folk song Carul cu Boi, Cart and Oxen. So the ubiquity of contrafaction in Jewish communities and beyond is a testament to its effectiveness. Among other things, contrafacted songs, especially when there's something that's maybe familiar to us, can facilitate group singing, can help us to remember the words and make the text accessible to us. It can bring a new interpretation to the text or serve as a vehicle for satire or parody. Just think of the music of Weird Al Yankovic as an example. And it can conjure emotions that would otherwise not be present in the text itself. So here's a fun example actually that I came up with. This is Ode to Yankee Doodle.
Oh no.
Hine Matov. So it uses partner songs, as it were, two independent songs that happen to have the same harmonic progression, more or less, to create a two-voice double contrafaction. This is again Hine Matov, sung to both at the same time, Ode to Joy and Yankee Doodle. Maybe later we can do it together, but just to give you a flavor. Hine Matov, what's that? Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. And the second part will come in. Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Etc. And they work very nicely together if you ever need a double contrafaction. Yeah. So what is Jewish and Jewish music? Everything and nothing. This is an image from a museum exhibit in London at the Jewish Museum. If you look at these records on the wall, you see some that you might identify as strictly Jewish, and others like Amy Winehouse and Al Jolson and Benny Goodman, and let's see, we have Simon and Garfunkel and others who are Jewish musicians whose music we might not necessarily identify as Jewish, but we might, and we'll get into that in a moment as well. So during a Scholar in Residence weekend, very similar to this kind of a weekend actually, my late mentor, Cantor William Charlin, who passed away in 2012 at the age of 92, was asked that eternally silly question: what is Jewish in Jewish music? And his Zen-like answer was everything and nothing. Meaning that any kind of music can become Jewish, but there is no exclusively Jewish element in the music of the Jews, as we've found. Again, music ordinarily identified as Jewish is identified by factors such as text, context, theme, convention, and function. We know that not all music written by Jews is therefore Jewish music, but all music written with a Jewish motivation, idea, purpose, or audience in mind, whatever that might mean, is Jewish music, even when those qualities might exist only in the subtext. So I'm reminded of the many secular Christmas songs written by Jewish songwriters in the 1940s and 50s. These were immigrants or sons of immigrants whose songs cleverly de-Christianized Christmas and made it a holiday that they themselves could celebrate. So in a way, they made Christmas Jewish. We can talk about that later if you want to have a discussion about whether or not that's a stretch. But nonetheless, Cantor Charlin was fascinated by something that we've noticed already. The force of language in transforming the music that accompanies it. He said, it is the very taste, the feel, the association, and the context of that language. It's so powerful that you can put almost anything against the Hebrew language or the Yiddish language or the Ladino language, and you will experience it as a Jewish experience. He illustrated the point with the setting of Sim Shalom, a prayer for peace, which had all the earmarks of a cantorial composition. He played the piece on the piano after singing it, and then he asked the audience to name that tune, and it was in fact Gustav Mahler's Song of the Wayfarer. So these days, most Jewish musicologists, or musicologists of the Jewish, as some like to be called, take a functionalist view of Jewish music, or the music of the Jews, as it's more accurately called. The functionalist approach, which focuses on what the music accomplishes or accompanies, rather than how it might sound necessarily, was articulated most famously by musicologist Kurt Sachs at the first International Conference of Jewish Music in 1957. He said, and this is widely quoted, "Jewish music is that music which is made by Jews, for Jews, as Jews. By Jews, for Jews, as Jews." On the surface, this is a very inclusive definition, again focusing really on function rather than sound. But there are some flaws even in this inclusive definition. Too much stress, you might say, is placed on the identity of the composer, performer, or the audience, both of which can be non-Jewish, as it happens. Famous examples of this include Max Brooks's setting of Kol Nidre for cello in orchestra, in organ. Max Bruch not only was not a Jew, but he was something of an anti-Semite, as it happens.
Oh,
Yeah, so there you go. Yes. The same is true for Dmitri Shostakovich, who wrote from Jewish poetry, really as a tribute to the Jews, but he himself was not Jewish. And there's a current revival of klezmer in Poland, which really involves, more often than not, non-Jews performing for other non-Jews. So here's another stretch. If we dare to take it to its extreme, we might even say that a decidedly non-Jewish song, such as, let's say, YMCA by the Village People, has become a de facto Jewish song by virtue of being a fixture of B'nai Mitzvah parties.
oh, yeah.
So you might experience it as Jewish. Who am I to judge? So I'd like to conclude with a piece by Cantor William Charlin, who was, I think, a lot like many of us. He was born in a strictly Orthodox family in New York in 1920, spent his teenage years in Jerusalem, gradually became a Universalist through his experiences at Manhattan School of Music and in the Army during World War II, graduated from the first graduating class of the School of Sacred Music at HUC Hebrew Union College in New York, which was the first cantorial school in the United States, and had a long and rich career as a composer, cantor, and scholar. In a concert of his music in 1989, a year after he retired from Leo Beck Temple in Los Angeles, Charlin was brought on stage to talk extemporaneously about his music. And his words bring another shade into our discussion. He reminds us that not only is all Jewish music, just by being Jewish music, hybrid, as we've talked about, with mixing, adapting, and updating being the historical norm, but also that individual composers bring idiosyncratic influences together in their music. And this is what he said about himself. Maybe it resonates with some of us. "I am a man who straddles two worlds. I am a Jew and I am a Universalist. I am a tribal Jew and I am also a humanist. I am a mystic and I am a rationalist. That doesn't bother me. I love these two worlds. I live in the world of the three Bs, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. And you might throw in an M for Mozart. But I also live in the world of that other B, Broadway. It's there somehow or other. I live in the past and I also live in modernity. And it's these two challenging worlds that I think have moved me my entire life. So as a closer, I thought we'd listen to Cantor Charlin's setting of this quotation from our friend Albert Einstein. To see with one's own eyes, to feel and judge without succumbing to the suggestive power of the fashion of the day, to be able to express what one has seen and felt, is that not glorious?
To see with one's own eyes.
you.